let's go into Q&A session. The first person that we have Mark Sokol with the world's biggest grin, and he has none other than Mr. Travis Walton with him. So Mark, go for it, sir. Oh, you're muted. Sorry. Let me.
Okay, there we go. Yes, Travis had a couple questions for you.
I've got a million questions, but a simple one would be, would the properties of these drives operating this craft interfere in any way with its ability to orient or communicate from outside sources, things as far as where, navigation and communication?
Absolutely. So yeah, in order to produce magnetic fields that are on the order of 10 to the 15 Tesla or some retarded high amount, you're going to have a lot of shielding in place. Not to mention if you're using nuclear reactors or if you're using tokamak plasma type containers, the amount of interference is going to be beyond ridiculously high. And how they would manage to shield against all that, my best guess would be utilizing metamaterials to be able to capture a lot of this. The fact that we see cloaking on a lot of these things as well suggests that they're able to redirect electromagnetic fields in ways that they want, which gives me hope that if this thing has been in play for as long as it has, and if we see these craft flying in formation like we did at the beginning of the talk, that there is ways for them to communicate, as well as have other sensors be able to be working while this craft is flying. I couldn't imagine any pilot flying one of these craft without having his whole instrument panel, not working. That just wouldn't make any sense to me.
Well, that was immediately comes to mind with the properties of the drive versus the need to orient yourself and navigate.
Also, as a further aside, some of the accounts of folks from the UFO community usually suggest that the reason why a lot of these pilots and these occupants of these crafts aren't just, turned into jello on the side of the wall when it accelerates at 100 Gs is they're actually weightless inside, that when they are generating these fields that somehow nullify gravity or somehow produce an anti-inertial effect, that the occupants inside are feeling nothing. The accounts specifically with the TR-3B suggest that there was an 89% reduction in the amount of inertia felt by the pilots. So accelerating at 100 Gs means they were feeling 8.9 Gs, which the average pilot can only handle 8.9 Gs for like a second. But a second is long enough to go from 100 feet to 100,000 feet when you're accelerating at these rates.
Is there any way this craft could be piloted without human beings inside? Could be operated in some way, programmed to go to a particular point?
Absolutely. So yeah, we already have plenty of good examples out there of UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, right? That we've had these things for 30 plus years, 40, 50 years, where these things fly on their own. They don't even need a remote pilot. They can just be given a certain set of commands and they're able to follow those commands. For the longest time when researching this, I was suspecting that if they were having trouble getting the inertia aspect of the whole package down, they would have been having to fly them either remotely or automated. But
from killing the pilots.
Yep. But based off of a lot of the flight patterns that we've seen from these things, it would suggest that they are under some form of active control, not just a passive or automated system. But there's actual pilots that are able to deal with greater unknowns and thus react in a faster time frame.
So they've achieved inertial isolation or
Reduction
at least.
Travis, in your case, did you ever feel weightless on board the spaceship?
Actually, I felt heavier, but that may have just been because I was injured. I could hardly move my body.
If they do have control over the gravity inside or the inertial one fields inside, it would make sense to make it comfortable for whoever is inside, right? They wouldn't necessarily make you weightless if you need to be able to, get to certain panels or move around in a way that you're more used to. If you're feeling an extra amount of added weight, that may be because the inertial effects are working overtime and they're still not fully overcoming the accelerations that the craft are undergoing. It's all conjecture.
Live on a very large planet and need 1.5 G in order to be to keep their timber.
The external dimensions are enormous. I'm curious about how much of the interior would be just drive equipment, and how much of it would be open to cargo or passenger space.
So from the research I've done of it, it suggests there's usually 4 occupants, a pilot, a nuclear specialist for the reactor, usually a co-pilot who is also doubling as the electronic warfare, the backseat guy, and then a 4th person who is usually rotating either as someone that they're taking somewhere, or if they are doing certain special activities, they may need more hands on deck, so to speak. But 4 has been, generally speaking, the maximum I've heard, just because they're already barely overcoming all of the forces necessary to even achieve flight. So it does not have a huge payload capacity, even though the thing probably weighs somewhere around 60 to 200 tons. It's using all of that mass to negate a lot of its mass.
Well, the deceleration I witnessed would have been crushing without inertial isolation.
Okay, Bruce Cornet.
What wonderful. Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, well, Travis, thank you, sir. So let me go to Bruce Cornet then. Bruce, go for it.
Yes, I just wanted to mention that I put a link to my video in the chat to a video of the TR-3B that we captured on the 10th of May 1997. I mean, yeah. Anyway, it was 1997 when we got it. There were 3 of us with 3 cameras, and we were told later that we'd gotten permission from the Pentagon for Skunk Works to give us a demonstration. So if Jarod wants to take a look at this, I'd love to have his comments, because this triangle does all sorts of amazing maneuvers in the night sky.
Bruce, I would love to see that video. I'm not seeing it in chat at the moment, though.
It was early on that I put it. So
Yeah, I think let me see. Here it is. So that's the bufo.co.uk, I think.
right.
Yeah, I will. Let me see if I can repaste that in there. Nope. Now it's not working.
Try at my end here.
Okay, I see it. I see it now.
There, I just repasted that in the chat as well.
Okay, here it is again from my end. Anyway, that's really what I wanted to say, other than that this is more information that I've seen about the TR-3B that has been released by anybody, and that's phenomenal. Thank you.
And thank you as well, Bruce. So again, and oops, where'd my file go? So if you want to raise your hand at Zoom and ask questions, it's Option Y on Mac or Alt Y on Windows. And again, Jarod has done a tremendous amount of research on the TR-3B, and Jarod, I can't thank you enough. It's putting the pieces together. It's the synthesis. That's what excites me. It's and then researching, I guess, these what would you call it, convergence of technologies from different sources. That's also incredibly intriguing. So
One of the things that I'd like to mention is that Ellen Crystal photographed triangular craft back in 1980, before the flap that occurred in the Hudson Valley, and she puts those pictures in her book. And what is interesting about them, she was claiming that these were, ETVs, but I'm beginning to wonder whether or not they were early models of the TR-3B, because they give off so much radiation that is being picked up by the film on the camera. And that may have been some of the first evidence that they were out flying around in New York.
Yep. Also, further, I didn't talk about it, but one of those earliest images I showed at the beginning of the green night vision looking triangle, those were the images taken by all of the Navy personnel on a carrier or destroyer, just like in the last couple of years. And the debunker community got all over this saying, oh, those are just a camera artifact of the night vision. They were calling them bokeh triangles. I strongly suspect that there has been interactions between these craft and our military personnel. Supposedly the craft are not under the control of the military. These are private enterprises, Lockheed and potentially Boeing, that are owners of this material. So that's one way that they're able to prevent the general public or even government officials from getting their hands on this stuff, and thus disclosing it, is by keeping it in the commercial sector, where NDAs and protection of information is actually easier than when you have required oversights from military officials and others like that. Yeah, there's been so many sightings of these things throughout the decades, and it's possible some of the triangles out there aren't ours. It's possible all of the triangles out there aren't ours, that the TR-3B was a big disinformation campaign. I'm not going to say one way or another that this thing actually exists or that it doesn't exist. But from the evidence of what I've researched, it suggests to me that the potential for its existence is there.
Awesome. Awesome. So again, oops, sorry about that. Just somebody else come in. Yeah, so Option Y on Mac or Alt Y on Windows, if you want to ask Jarod a question. And Jarod, you've covered so much territory. I think that might be part of the challenge, is that, we've got a lot of blown minds in the audience. But
it was a lot of information and a lot of material, and it's like you have to have a combination of ADD and OCD to be able to capture all of these extremely disparate ideas, and yet be able to dive down into each one of them to be able to identify any overlaps between any of them. It is not a simple task to listen to this, let alone to try to research this.
the overlaps are what's exciting, though. And you know what it
Yep.
reminded me of? Maybe this sounds cheesy, but Jeremy Reese, right, who's here today, sort of kind of, he used to do these videos years ago, right?
Yep.
And so your presentation kind of reminded me of his videos where Jeremy would, it was this synthesis that made it greater than the sum of its parts. And so that, again, that's the exciting part.
I cannot shout out to Jeremy enough. Honestly, his work on this, I felt, was as groundbreaking as Ed Fouche's. Ed Fouche gave us the information. Jeremy gave us some synthesis of it, as well as exposure. His video going viral exposed the world. So many millions of people all of a sudden went from never having heard about this to finding this, plausible and interesting. So big thanks to Jeremy for everything he's already provided on this topic. Huge thanks.
Yeah, he's done so much on it. He's done so much. Okay, well, let me see. Michael Boyd has a question. Michael, go for it, sir.
So I'm curious about, one of the things you didn't talk about was different mediums. Like we've seen the UAPs are under the water as well. So I'm curious about your thoughts on that.
So my research on this is ongoing. Some of this information I just came across even last night and added to the talk. Like it's my biggest passion next to the Grab-a-Flyer. All of my free time goes into researching warp drives, and usually with a gear towards either the Tic Tacs, as Charles Hall described, or the flying triangles. With regards to the Tic Tacs and their ability to do transmedium travel, a book I just came across last night from 2014 by some NASA guy, he goes through and he analyzes all the data that we have, especially he gets some mass measurements and calculations from imprints in soil from some of the craft. And he suggests anywhere from 25 to 60 tons as a weight of these things. But he also suggests that their mass density is similar to water, that it's like 94 or 96% similar to water. And that's part of the reason why they're able to do the transmedium travel. They're actually like flying submarines, which having that much mass and being able to fly is mind blowing. But for the transmedium travel for the TR-3B, the skin of the craft is likely to possess a lot of electronic warfare protections, right? So just like the F-117 or other F-22 or any of the stealth aircraft out there, they have normally radar reflecting material. In addition to that, now we're starting to see that because of the left-hand metamaterials, they're getting camouflaging abilities of this as well. They're able to redirect the light rays around them. In order to actually do transmedium travel though in a way that doesn't destroy the aircraft, you have to be, that warp bubble around the thing has to actually like extend far enough, or you have to have a shielding of some kind. Shielding was one thing that I didn't mention that may also be responsible for the gamma rays observed. If they have electromagnetic shields around them, that may present a route or a method for these gamma rays to be emitted. Also, there's plenty of accounts out there of people who have approached UFOs and they get ionizing radiation burns, right? This is all over all the UAP reports. I just came across one incident from 1960 something where a couple of guys from Central or South America, they got within 20 feet of a craft, and in 2 days, one of them had died from the gamma radiation that liquefied his inside.
Travis over here got hit by a lightning beam when he approached the
My
craft.
pleasure again, Travis. Take care. Have a safe trip back.
Yeah, actually, Travis, could you describe a little bit the size, the shape, the color, and the distance from you to the craft of that beam?
It was instantaneous. It was a flash. It was something that the rest of the crew described as blinding. One crewman was interviewed by an officer and described it as looking like a long blue flame. Another described it as a foot-wide beam, and another, compared it to a bolt of lightning. So they all had their different interpretation of what they saw, but there was also just the idea that it was blindingly bright.
Excellent.
It's that bright, it's hard to see any color.
They all bluish green, greenish blue.
The color is important, but also the shape is important, right? If it was a smooth beam versus a jagged beam like lightning, that may indicate different mechanisms at play. If it's a jagged beam, it's probably like electrons, right? It's conducting electricity down. But if it's a straight beam, that means it's using photons, and photons aren't going to be doing all this ionizing branching effects, which if we're trying to reverse engineer this, or even at a bare minimum, understand this, identifying all the characteristics of these effects that we see come from the craft is extremely important.
Did you get a sunburn?
I didn't, but
Did you get any physical effects like heating your skin, or did you feel hot?
A faint heat on my bare skin, my face looking up.
Because protons, a proton beam wouldn't penetrate. Protons don't go very far. Alpha particles, but beta, they go a little bit farther, but gammas go all the way through. So you wouldn't feel the gamma, but you would feel the alphas. You follow? Because they're like
the crewman that was exposed in the truck developed skin cancer on a spare arm.
Oh,
Was that the arm that was like out of the truck?
Yeah, it was towards, on the side towards the craft.
gotcha. So
How-
yeah, he got a radiation burn.
How long after his exposure did he develop the cancer?
It was a number of years, but you know, he was a very pale, fair-skinned individual.
And approximately what would you guess was his distance from the craft?
At least 90 feet, probably.
You were closer,
Yeah, I was closer myself.
but he
So
was.
was
he
the craft aloft or was it on the ground?
It was aloft.
So now the fields are the anti-gravitational fields are going to be producing themselves are going to be producing radiation because it's blue shifting. That's what's causing the space-time there is expanded compared to normal space-time, let us say. So that's going to cause Hal Putoffs did a couple of videos where he's talking about the harmful effects of this technology. He has one about where he talks about blue shifting and how you can get radiation burns if you get too close to these things. So I appreciate your answers and thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your insights, Travis.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. So let me go back to Bruce briefly.
Oh, two
Bruce,
things I wanted to mention. Number one, in that triangle demonstration, which I think is the TR-3B, as it approached the cameras, there were two camcorders and one SLR. It shut down my Mark's camcorder. He said, my battery's going dead. I just charged it and mine wasn't affected. But then the craft increased the intensity of one of its lateral lights to almost the brightness of the moon. And it started producing, what does he call it? Lens flares in my camera. You could see that as well. And the other thing, mentioning cancer, is that Ellen Crystal in her book describes getting very close to one of these triangular craft that was hovering right on top of her. She close enough that she tried to jump up and touch it. And she unfortunately died of pancreatic cancer 10 or more years later. So.
awesome. Okay. Well, thank you, Bruce.
So just an observation also about that. There was a guy by the name of Bill Uhouse who hung around Area 51 and the Ailey Inn for a long time. And he told people that he had worked out at Area 51 in the 50s as a flight simulator instructor for the craft. He claimed that the craft were using somewhere in the range of 6 million volts to actually attain an electrogravitic effect for their levitation, and that they could only operate for about 30 minutes because of the amount of liquid nitrogen that they had on board. And that when he was inside the thing, he had to wear like a chainmail type thing and move very slowly so as not to arc because there's such a high electrostatic potential inside that thing. One other thing that I want to mention is that a Tear in the Sky documentary that I just saw, where the team of scientists took all of these instruments onto a rooftop down by Catalina Island. That 43 MeV gamma ray that they observed, 3 minutes prior to observing that, they had 8 FLIR infrared cameras pointed all over the sky, and 2 of these cameras were actually oriented in a way where they would have captured this thing. And just a few minutes before it emitted that energy burst, all 8 FLIRs went offline at the same time, and they were powered by 2 separate power sources, and they still all went offline at the same time. So to me, that sounds like one of 2 things. One, either they are just overloading the circuitry in it, which I don't think is necessarily the case unless it's a very directed beam. Or 2, they might have inside information on different tech that we have, and they're using that information to specifically target certain tech that we have. So if they got all the blueprints and the schematics and the diagrams for FLIR cameras, hey, now we know exactly how to, pop these offline, just like a 0-day hack for any software-based type interference. So their electronic warfare capabilities, either they have very good directionality, or more likely they have superior knowledge or insider knowledge of some of our tech.
Yeah, Josh, sorry, Jarod, are you talking about UAP or with the TR-3B? Because with it's the Catalina Island, it was UAP, right?
Correct. Although they did have one capture of a triangle. I don't think the triangle was the one that was where they were detecting these very high gamma rays from. I think they still detected some gamma rays from it, but they didn't go into it. I've reached out to some of the scientists from it. I haven't heard back from them yet. I'm trying to get their data set. That would be amazing. Yeah, so you just have to, choose how much skepticism or how much belief you're willing to have. If the TR-3B is solely human tech, if there is no alien tech, if the only thing out there that we see is human-based tech, which I don't believe to be the case, then that would give one avenue for how they would have insider knowledge, because of course they're going to reverse engineer, the FLIR cameras that they already have on board. Of course, they already have contracts with FLIR to have full access to all of their engineering diagrams. However, if you take the superior intelligence model, even a moderately superior AI would be able to very rapidly identify certain components of certain tech and be able to identify how to overwhelm that tech in a way as to render it useless.
Well, yeah, and if I could suggest something, and I'm sure this wouldn't be universal, but so I guess there are a couple of thoughts. One of them is, as our technology continues to progress and develop, right? Microprocessors become more, what do you call it? The chip sizes become more fine, and so it's going to be easier and easier and easier to knock those offline with electrostatic charges, or you name it, any kind of energy, whether or not it's directed, right? And that's just because we don't shield things as much as we could or should. Things aren't necessarily radiation hardened, but those transistors inside of our chips are just getting smaller and smaller. So part of it could be that. The other part, and this is something that I personally feel, is UAP, if it's intelligently controlled, and I personally believe it's machine intelligence. That's just kind of my gut feeling. Back in with Travis Walton's encounter, that was back in the days of, I don't know what you call it, the real world, I guess. Now, everything we have is online, and so they wouldn't necessarily have to identify components. They could just look up the schematic for the model number, and that's just something that I kind of assume is a given. If positing that UAP are real and they're intelligently controlled by somewhere, I would just assume that they probably know everything we have. They could be, not to sound paranoid, they could be watching this right now, chuckling, So
one of the analyses I saw on a supposition on how their information systems may work, they could have exaflop or higher computing power. In like a small cube, they could have the amount of computing power of the entire planet, right? Which means that it's not that big of a stretch, if they have that, to say that they're able to very rapidly identify weaknesses of any of our abilities to track them or to identify characteristics of them.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I mean, the capabilities of those craft, just in general, seem to indicate incredibly high amounts of just information processing, right? And I mean, when you look at computers, really for us, computing is probably about 50 years old, the way that we think of it now. You give that another few hundred years, and where would that be? So. Well, let me see. Does anyone else have questions for Jarod? Jarod, if you want to come back and do a presentation on UAPs, if you want to do something like this for UAPs, please. I would thoroughly enjoy that.
I have,
Mhm.
sorry, to jump in. I have a question. Do you think that they combine all our telecommunication, all the impulses of electrical communication that we have, and, you know, they harness it into 3 points of existing? I mean, that would only logic be, you know, the resonance of all that energy that we're emitting. They have to be able to harness it somehow, you know, and use it to materialize a, you know, a space and time to take an image, like, you know, of where we are as a civilization, and, you know, make it smaller and smaller, and somewhere, you know, they stack it as a time image of, you know, our energy level. I mean, look at
Absolutely,
it.
absolutely.
Look at its shape, even. It feels like it's like a place where they store timelines, you know, and then it goes off somewhere and it gets put, you know, on a bigger scale of a stack and so forth. But might be able to, you know, imagine that image or that shape with those dimensions, you know, apart from a more gigantic structure.
Yep. So I think one of the most useful things in trying to research or understand anything that is above your pay grade, which is definitely above my pay grade, is trying to maintain a certain amount of awareness of, you don't know what you don't know and how much you don't know. So if we take that to, who knows if it's even the extreme, for more intelligent things out there, or more capable things out there than us, that have been around for potentially a ridiculously much longer time frame than us, they may already have all of the potential advancement trajectories for a civilization as it grows, right? And so for them to come in to a backwater place like here and say, oh, look, they're at this stage, let's just do a quick snap. Okay, now we got all of the information on that entire planet. Let's analyze it. Wait 2 seconds. Okay, now we totally know where they're going, what they're doing. They would already know everything about it. It would be a walk in the park for them.
Yeah. Well, so on that note, let me, Mark is ready to go. So let's do this.
Thank you.
Let me, and thank you, Lulu. Let me put this back on gallery view. Everyone, please, another applause for Jarod. A wonderful, incredibly in-depth presentation. Jarod, I would love you to come back and do something similar on UAPs, if and when you're open to it.
Yeah.
And so what I'd like to do now is